Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to see so many of you here. I suspect that as the series goes on, there will be more and more people coming. There's more people than last time. So next time they'll be waiting outside to try to get in. Word of mouth spreads very effectively in Cambridge. I've been looking forward to today's instance of Burhan's lecture series on Homo artifacts the whole week, actually. Somewhat in the same way that before binge watching took over, I used to look forward to the next episode of a popular TV series. I've been thinking about it the whole week, thinking, what's he going to do next time? What we were offered last time was something I thought quite magical, or magical realist even. We had stories, we had biographical details, worldwide connections, philosophical musings about a range of topics, all spun together by a great storyteller, a real novelist. So it was a real treat, and I'm sure we have one today too. And for me, it's a break from sort of regular proceedings, so absolutely fantastic. I should say something about Burhan for those who are coming here for the first time. Burhan grew up in Turkey, in a small village, where he liked to listen to his mother. We learned that last time. To listen to his mother tell stories about all kinds of things, which had interesting connections with stories being told in Japan. He studied law in Istanbul and was a human rights lawyer, an activist, came here. He originally wanted to be a poet, but found his calling as a novelist, of which he has produced, if Wikipedia is correct, which it may not be, 5 so far. Many have been translated in many languages. North is one, Sins and Innocence, of course a nice play of words. Love is of Franz K, and so on. Burhan is also the president of PEN International. And I think my job here is to say as little as possible, because the master storyteller is waiting to mount the podium and entertain us for the next hour or so, and inform us for the next hour or so. So please join me in welcoming Burhan.
Thank you very much, Hans. Thank you for coming, even though it's a beautiful day again outside, you are here. Vincenzo Perugia was an Italian worker who had worked for some time at the Louvre Museum in Paris. Met Mona Lisa there and decided to take her with him. On Sunday evening, 20 August 1911, he slipped through the door used by workers, put on the white smoke that museum workers wore. He ripped the Mona Lisa from the wall and hid it in his smock. It was not noticed on the first day that Mona Lisa was stolen. It was thought that she was taken in for a photo shoot. It was only the next day when a painter who was working at the gallery asked when Mona Lisa would return that the Mona Lisa's fate was realized. The Louvre's gates were locked. The country's borders were on alert, and a general alarm was sounded. The police questioned many people, including the poet Guillaume Apollinaire and painter Pablo Picasso. The photograph of this Italian woman, who was not known to many outside of a certain intellectual circle, was hung on all the streets of France. At a time when there was not yet television and cinema was just beginning to be born, Mona Lisa suddenly became the most famous face in the world. When Mona Lisa's photograph was published in all the newspapers in Europe, people were fascinated both by the story and by the strange look of this woman they saw for the first time. And they flocked in enchantment to the Louvre Museum, which reopened a week later. People looked at the empty wall in the gallery. The woman hanging on this wall a week ago was missing. Now, staring into that void, people were immersed in a world they felt but couldn't articulate. For the first time, queues were forming in front of the Louvre Museum. During the more than 2 years leading up to Vincenzo Perugia's capture in Florence and the discovery of the Mona Lisa, thousands of people, including writers like Kafka, waited patiently in long queues to look at an empty wall. The question is not about the Mona Lisa leaving the Louvre as an ordinary painting and returning as an icon, nor about the possibility that the thief might have stolen an alternative painting, say La Belle Ferroniere, so that she would perhaps have become a star instead. The question is this: why does one look into emptiness? Is emptiness empty? Those who come to see not the presence, but the absence of a painting in the museum are immersed in infinity, in the emptiness of the wall, drawn to it floating as if searching for meaning in the deep night sky. Although innocence, lost beauty, and the sense of integration bring people together in front of an empty wall, they look at something else, an imagery beyond the threshold. 3 things emerge in the Mona Lisa void: the empty wall, the person looking at the wall, and the image of Mona Lisa in that person's mind. As people are caught up in a new wave of attachment to museums and devotion to paintings, they realize that the void doesn't have a single meaning, that with every glance, the void opens up towards new meanings, as they sense that imagery is a tongueless meaning beyond words. The thief, who had first thought of stealing another painting in the Louvre, said he chose the Mona Lisa because he felt she was looking at him as he passed by. Mona Lisa is a form that evokes another form. Ever since the transformation of God, whose death was proclaimed, into new forms within art, the quest for perfection continues. Quote, "Art is mankind's movement forward towards perfection," Tolstoy says in his book, What is Art? In the face of the perfect forms of divinity, the imperfect forms of art develop a bond between death and beauty. While death is the perfect form and life is the imperfect form, art tries to create a new dimension between these two. Aristotle states in Poetics that poetry tends to express universals and history particulars. Forms of beauty in art, although they usually don't have direct meanings, are a way of expressing universals. Through beauty, art appropriates magic's promise of transcendence. The human being who wants not only to understand the truth but also to become a part of it is in search of integration of the beautiful with the sublime. Beauty is the manifestation of sublimity in form. Art is longing for the absolute, whereby beauty and sublime are united, like the sun and light. If one exists, so does the other. Although the sun is the cause and light is the effect, they cannot be considered apart. So it is for beauty and sublime. If one exists, so does the other. It was not only the Mona Lisa that carried the light and sun of meaning in existence, but the emptiness left behind from it now contained that meaning and called people there. Looking at the emptiness in the wall reminds me of bending over and looking into a well. In that well, there are both the things we forget and the things we remember. There is a word in Kurdish, bir, which simultaneously means remembering and forgetting. It's also the root word for memory, consciousness, and intellect. And what excites me the most as a writer is that this word actually means water well. In my novel, Labyrinth, I wrote the story of a young musician who attempted suicide but escaped with a lost memory. I focus on whether that musician should remember his past or leave it forgotten and chart a new life for himself. I had experienced a somewhat similar situation. That is, when I was injured and had a brain trauma, my connection with the world became confused and turned upside down. As my memory weakened, I was especially unable to learn new things. I overcame this situation, which lasted for several years, with great fears and anxieties. At that time, I used to stand in front of mirrors a lot, watch my face, and feel as if I was leaning into a well and looking at my reflection there. That's how I came to write my novel, Labyrinth. In such stories, the protagonist who lost his memory generally turns to his past with the hope of recapturing it. However, I prefer to focus on the relationship between remembering and forgetting, rather than go mad for the past. That is usually impossible to grasp. Remembering the past is also a challenge. After all, the protagonist in my novel is someone who attempts suicide, but he doesn't remember why he wanted to take his own life. If he finds his past, maybe he will turn to suicide again. Although this creates a tendency for him to focus on the future rather than the past, he remains in limbo, a constant state of hesitation. While writing this novel, I read a story by the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges. The story was titled Funes, the Memorious. The incident goes like this. When James Joyce died in 1941, a newspaper in Argentina asked Borges to write an article about Joyce. In his short article, Borges speaks about a story he was working on at the time, Funes' story, rather than Joyce. After hitting his head in an accident, Funes' character changed and he remembered everything exactly. He doesn't forget even a single second. Every detail is in his memory, including the position of the clouds on a particular day years ago. We know, in general, life is the ability to balance forgetting and remembering. Funes, on the other hand, suffers greatly by remembering every detail. He becomes a kind of monster. In his novel, Ulysses, James Joyce showed that he had a kind of Funes mind when he wrote down all the details of a single day for hundreds of pages. In this respect, Borges says that Ulysses is a monster. With his mind full of endless details and facts, Funes lacks the ability to think abstractly. He cannot make sense of the world with concepts. That is the main problem for him, because he can't interpret anything logically. When the young musician in my novel Labyrinth lost his memory, I wanted to draw him a path where he could focus on meanings instead of facts. My protagonist, named Boratin, tries to understand the difference between the past and history. In his eyes, the place where everything finds a solution is the relationship between time and space. Even though he loses his memory about himself, he remembers general events, such as the collapse of the Ottoman Empire or the crucifixion of Jesus. But he cannot know when these things happened. Did the Ottoman Empire collapse 100 years ago or last year? Was Jesus crucified 2,000 years ago or 2 years ago? Is the pain he suffered left in history, or is it a pain that is still fresh and continues in today's life in different forms? At the opening of my novel, the protagonist wakes up one morning as happens in Kafka's Metamorphosis, and sees that he has a body that he doesn't recognize because his memory is empty, like a dry well. In Kurdish, remembering is like taking something out of a well. We say, "Babiranin." Forgetting is like leaving something into a well. We say, "Jibirkren." One would sing and dance to remember and forget at the head of a water well that constantly fills and empties in this life. That is both the beauty and magic of life. It is not that Mona Lisa herself is beautiful, but her painting. That is the magic through art. As Plutarch quotes the poet Philoxenus, quote, "The nicest meat is what is not meat, and the nicest fish is what is not fish," end quote. What is truth is the most tired question of humanity. Classical questions are not questions that have a straight answer, but questions whose answers change and deepen at every stage. God, in the face of Satan's objection, offered a new answer. The human being was the new answer. Satan insisted on defending the old answer to created being. God was the old answer. This was the story I told last week. While Gabriel Garcia Marquez's novel was being printed, it was stolen and put on the market by a pirate. Angered by this, Marquez stopped the printing and made changes in the book and told the readers, "This new one is my book." Now, when there are two books, which is the real one, the one that the pirate distributed to the market or the one that Marquez changed and published? Marquez, while reviving his stolen book by changing certain sentences, offers a new answer to the pirate's objection and prefers to show that he doesn't exist for the truth, but the truth exists for him. On the other hand, the pirate who stole the book believes that they possess the original and complete form of truth. They don't see that the artist is not a messenger who conveys the truth and submits themselves to it, but is a being who creates, distorts, and then recreates the truth. The opposite of truth in art is not untruth, but another truth. And the opposite of beauty is another beauty. It doesn't lack ugliness. But in the ugly, a lack of beauty is felt. Therefore, the opposite of ugly is not another ugly, but beauty. The meaning of beauty in a thing is variable, just like matter and time. Blue is not always beautiful for everyone and everywhere. It changes. Quote, "We are still living under the reign of logic." André Breton complained in the first manifesto of Surrealism in 1924, referring to the entire period of epic time and concept time. He then continued, "But in this day and age, logical matters are applicable only to solving problems of secondary interests." Those who look at the empty wall in the Louvre Museum unknowingly turn to the problems of primary interest. One is more than a one. Many ones can be brought together and become something new, whereas zero is a one. It cannot be multiplied and added up. The human being of civilization works with ones in order to understand existence, searching the meaning of each outright one and its connection with other ones. Art, starting with the beauty of one, tries to comprehend the meaning, integrity, and infinity of zero. The language of civilization is still one, whereas humans strive to understand zero, just as they strove while gazing at the wall from which the Mona Lisa had disappeared. Zero is beyond one, and those who look at the blank wall of the Louvre are thinking in the realm beyond language. Art may be the mirror of life, But what is in the mirror is not the same as what is reflected. In the mirror, right is on the left, and left is on the right. The artist perceives horizontal displacement in the mirror, but wonders why vertical displacement doesn't occur, why the top doesn't go down and the bottom go up. Hence, the artist attempts to create a new reality. The mirror of art doesn't just turn reality horizontally, it also changes it vertically. And that's not enough. It transposes the front to the back and turns the back into the front. It doesn't stop there. It takes the inside out and brings the outside in, and so on. Where nature is complex, art presents order. And where nature is orderly, art creates chaos. While art, in the sense of reversing the mirror in every dimension and presenting all dimensions together, opens the human's horizon towards a new dimension, the artist appears as a thinking and dreaming mirror. In the story of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde draws the picture of beauty. He uses art to represent the possibility of immortality and places it there like a mirror. In a letter he wrote, he reflects on the different dimensions of human personality while describing the three characters in the novel through himself. Quote, Basil Hallward is what I think I am, Lord Henry what the world thinks me, and Dorian what I would like to be, in other ages perhaps. End quote. We see that the language of art is more than a word in literature, a sound in music, and a color in painting. It goes beyond the perception of five senses. Every person transforms the work of art by producing it in themselves. Common meaning in art would require a common human, a uniformity that we haven't achieved. By defining the common being, theology created the idea of common human. This was a truth too, but when humans overflowed from the mouths of old forms in search of new truths, religion lagged behind the pace of human speed and desire for change. Art, which reversed everything in the mirror, brought the distant near, opening new spaces for humans. The death of God was also the death of the old common human. A person cannot decide his or her own birth. A person who is helpless at birth may have willpower at death. In general, suicide means deciding on the time of one's own death. To possess this time is a kind of intervention in fate and at the same time an expression of power. But it may also be possible to leave the time open and decide on the place. In other words, we can direct our destiny not in terms of when we will die, but in terms of where we will die. We don't know what will happen in the future. In universe and nature, the future is open-ended, that is open-textured. In that open-textured future, we know that we are in a flow that will soon come to an end and we will die. In Kurdish language, human means mrov. The word mr in its root means death. Thus, humans means one who is mortal or destined to death. It is like a reflection of Heidegger's concept of being towards death. Knowing that we live in death is not only the element that distinguishes humans from animals, but also the source of both our anxiety and creativity. I wrote about a character who decides where he will die, not when he will die, in my novel, Stone and Shadow. The protagonist of the novel is a tombstone maker and chooses to live in a cemetery. So it is certain that he will die there, because the grave of the woman he loves is there. It is not enough to want to be buried next to that woman. He also wants his death to happen next to her. I started to worry about this question, death and place, long ago, and dealt with it in my previous novel, Sins and Innocence. It is the novel that contains the most biographical elements. When I came to this country more than 20 years ago, I was a refugee in exile and believed that I had reached the end of my life. My lawyer status was not valid here. I didn't know the language properly. I was separated from my family and community, and most importantly, my health situation was not promising at all. I was receiving treatment with the support of the Freedom from Torture Center in London, but I deeply felt I would die here very soon. I said in my novel that wherever a person wants to be buried becomes his or her homeland. But I was in exile, far from my homeland where I wanted to be buried. I thought, if I'm going to die here, at least I can decide on the cemetery I will be buried in. Then I started wandering around the cemeteries in Cambridge. I spent time sitting at the head of the graves. One day, while I was talking on the phone with my older brother, he asked me if I had visited Wittgenstein. This was the brother who shaped my soul by introducing me to poetry. I knew that Wittgenstein taught in Cambridge, but I didn't know that his grave was here. I found the address of his cemetery online, got on my bike, and rode there on a cloudy day. It was easy to find the address, but it was not easy to find Wittgenstein in that church cemetery. There were two men digging graves in the yard. They dug many graves side by side and continued to dig new ones. This was a job usually done before winter came. So it might be autumn, perhaps, when I went there. How interesting I feel. I remember the clouds in the sky that day, the man digging graves, and the rain that started to drizzle. But I don't remember which day or even which month it was. I used my strange conversation with two grave diggers in my novel, Sins and Innocence, but everyone thought it was completely fictional. Eventually, I found Wittgenstein with the guidance of those men. That very day, I loved that place so much that I said I could be buried here. I found my home at death. At that time, I was reading Persian poets, especially Furu Feruzat, taking poetry books with me, and I visited there frequently. After that, I remember my soul was lighter and I felt better. My involvement in reading Wittgenstein started under these circumstances. So one reason why I refer to him a lot in these lectures is his philosophy. The other reason is his connection with my soul, his impact on my being in this city. Existence doesn't have a beginning and an end, but a state of becoming. Human being is in a constant state of becoming. The rose as a being can be divided into parts, but the idea of the rose as a form is indivisible in our minds. The beauty in the mind is one whole. The rose in the mind emerges from the being of the rose and desires arriving at a new one by dreaming of another rose. Art is born out of being and reaches abstraction, and from there it motivates us to reach a new being. Unlike the metaphysics of religion, this is not a search for a supernatural form, but an endeavor to create a form through processing of being. Every work of art is a proposition in the sense that Wittgenstein suggests. A proposition is a model of reality as we imagine it, he says. Being is nothing in itself. It is neither beautiful nor ugly. Humans, through art, give being a meaningful form. The sun in Van Gogh's painting series of the Sower is different from the sun in nature. On the 4.5 billion-year-old planet Earth, the sun has never appeared as it does in Van Gogh's painting. Van Gogh's sun is a metamorphosis. What looks like the sun in the sower is not the sun. Since the nature of art goes beyond reflecting real nature, it distorts it. Distortion, as a kind of play, is the key to creativity. The first person to paint an animal on the cave wall didn't know that they were metamorphosing the animal. As the clearest art form that directly imitates nature, painting creates a new nature by disrupting it. A person who can easily define happiness in their daily life cannot define the happiness they derive from a work of art with the same sense. It is not possible to explain the latter with the concepts of the former, because art requires the metamorphosis of language too. Plato's description of the cave in the Republic, where human beings mistake shadows for reality, illustrates the difficulty of attaining perfect being. Quote, imagine human beings living in an underground, cave-like dwelling. They've been there since childhood, fixed in the same place, able to see only in front of them. Light is provided by a fire burning far above and behind them. They would in every way believe that the truth is nothing other than the shadows of those artifacts. The person, end quote, the person who comes out of this cave, contrary to expectations, will not find themselves at the supreme level of knowing and understanding. Plato, in the voice of Socrates, explains the deterioration of the eyes of the person coming into the light. Quote, when one of them was freed and suddenly compelled to stand up, turn his head, walk, and look up toward the light, he'd be pained and dazzled and unable to see the things whose shadows he had seen before. If someone compelled him to look at the light itself, wouldn't his eyes hurt? End quote. Work of art is closer to truth than reality, as an attempt to depict the truth by someone who cannot perceive it because their eyes are dazzled by the light. Civilization advancing with knowledge is human being who comes out of the cave and is dazzled by the light. They have difficulty in perceiving what they see and give meaning to. They derive interpretations based on what they knew while in the cave. During the era of the most advanced science and technology, a proliferation of interpretations rather than belief is a sign that human beings can break free from absolute narratives, emerge from the cave, and become themselves. Whereas it's also an indication that humanity has not yet established a common language of knowing reflected by the light outside. God's failing is that they don't exist, and they leave humans alone. Coming out of the cave and realizing that they are alone in the universe, humans create philosophy, science, art, and so on. God was the minor metamorphosis in the cave, while art became the major metamorphosis in the light. There is a story about Wittgenstein. During the First World War, while he was serving in the Austro-Hungarian army, the military unit he was affiliated with went to the town of Tarnow, which is today within borders of Poland. Wittgenstein discovers a bookstore there, but it is wartime and there is only one book left in the bookstore, Tolstoy's non-fiction book called Gospel in Brief. He has no choice. He takes the book and starts reading. From that moment on, September 1914, his mood changes and he becomes attached to the book. This short religious book, which Tolstoy compiled from the Bible to create a new perspective outside of corrupt church interpretations, is like a divine voice for Wittgenstein. He carries the book with him throughout the war and becomes known as Man with the Gospel. He memorizes chapters from the book and mentions this book in the letters he writes to his friends, saying that this book kept him alive. Bertrand Russell, also mentions in a letter the mystical bond that Wittgenstein established with this book of Tolstoy. Quote, "He bought it merely because there was no other. He read it and reread it, and then had it always with him, under fire and at all times. But on the whole, he likes Tolstoy less than Dostoevsky, especially Karamazov. He has penetrated deep into mystical ways of thought and feeling. He gave all his money to his brothers and sisters because he found earthly possessions a burden." End quote. I don't know which part of this quote you like most, Dostoevsky part or leaving all money behind. While Wittgenstein was at the front in between conflicts, he began to take notes and write the Tractatus. Some researchers say that the form as well as the mood of this book, that is the method of explaining major issues with short and clear propositions, bears traces of the gospel in brief. In the past, in places like Persia in the East, it was believed that everyone had a book that accompanied their life. The life companion that Wittgenstein found in the 20th century was also found by Rumi in a different way 8 centuries earlier. When Rumi's father emigrated from northern Persia and looked for a new home for his family, Rumi was a teenager. It was a journey that lasted about 2 years. His father was a famous thinker at the time and was known as Sultan of the Scholars, Sultan al-Ulama. At the first stop of their journey, they went to see Attar, the great poet Feriduddin Attar. Rumi's father spent a day with him. As they took their leave at the end of their meeting, Attar wanted to present one of his books and give it as a gift. The book he would give was not the famous The Conference of the Birds, but his work called Book of Secrets, Esrarnama. What is surprising is that he gave this book not to the Sultan of the Scholars, who came to visit him, but to his youngest son, Rumi, in his crowded caravan. It is said that Rumi kept this book with him throughout his life. There are traces and references from this book in his work Masnavi. In his later years, in an ecstatic moment when he decided to get rid of the burden of existing knowledge by destroying all his books, Rumi kept only Book of Secrets apart. When I came to Britain, feeling as if I had fallen into this world, as Heidegger put it, and thinking about how to open a path for myself in this country, I believed that perhaps my salvation would only be possible by finding my own Book of Secrets. I describe this hardship in my novel, Sins and Innocence. In every work I read, from Wittgenstein Tractatus to Rumi's books, from Greek poetry to Russian novels, I looked for a spiritual talisman, waiting for a moment of enlightenment, feeling as if I had fallen on the road to Damascus. I was desperate because of missing my homeland, being frustrated by headaches and chronic insomnia, making me agonize on the brink of death. I was concentrating on writing a novel with the hope that I would someday find my own Book of Secrets. But I couldn't find the book that would save me. I now assume that all my reading from the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, who looks for immortality outside human beings, to the books of the French author Marcel Proust, who looks for immortality inside of human beings, is itself the secret that saves me from nothingness. This is like a journey taken by the little prince, as he says in the story. What makes the desert beautiful is that somewhere it hides a well. Wittgenstein found it in Tolstoy's book, as Rumi found it in Book of Secrets. Existence without human being only exists. Meaning cannot be attributed to it. Existence without art only exists. Beauty cannot be attributed to it. Human being is making existence meaningful through reason and beautiful through art. Heidegger says, the artist is the origin of the work of art. The work of art is the origin of the artist. The holistic being that he establishes between the artist and the work of art must be taken further. Thus, it must be said, human being is the origin of art, and art is the origin of human being. That is Homo artifex. As humans evolved alongside their skills in making tools, each tool contained a new depiction of truth. As they created tools, tools created humans. Every tool was oriented towards the survival of humans against the hardship of the world. Art, surpassing the desire for survival, differed from tools as a way of seeking the beautiful truth and making people happy in their search. A bee dances, sings, and makes honey. Human beings also dance, sing, and build structures. But by stepping further, they wonder and imagine beyond the possible. A tool is that which doesn't exist in nature and is created by humans. Art, on the other hand, is a longing for what has not yet been created, and in this sense, a dream of the future. An animal belongs to the present time. Human being belongs to the future. An animal exists in harmony with nature. Humans disrupt nature. Art is humans' transformation and an opening to the beyond, of which they don't yet know. Language, as an art, is beyond nature. The word axe has more functions than the actual axe itself. Humans have not reached sufficient maturity to fully appreciate their own creation and make sense of the axe in language, which can go far beyond the axe in hand. Plato described the structure of art by moving away from the truth in the Republic, whereby Socrates and Glaucon speak. Quote, then imitation is far removed from the truth, for it touches only a small part of each thing and a part that is itself only an image. Plato emphasizes here that the work of the artist is also devoid of knowledge, and carries on, a maker of an image, an imitator, knows nothing about that which is, but only about its appearance. Therefore, an imitator has neither knowledge nor right opinion about whether the things he makes are fine or bad. Then imitation is an inferior thing that concerts with another inferior thing to produce an inferior offspring. End quote. In his book, Ion, Plato states that the souls of the poets are possessed, while in the Republic he contends that the painters reflected the lowest image of truth, and that neither the artist nor the work of art inspire confidence. However, we can read these skeptical definitions in reverse, and then we can see that he is pointing to the positive qualities and authenticity of art. Because art is not a tool that can be reduced to the reality of the present world. The truth of art is a call that resonates beyond reality. Those who look at the blank wall of the Louvre Museum float in the space of the axe in language, not the axe in hand, and look at the horizon towards which that axe is traveling, swinging in the void. A work of art, even in its most alien state, creates a sense of belonging within us. In the same way, even in a work of art to which we feel a whole belonging and integration with ourselves, there is a tone to which we are alien. Art performs its reasoning through beauty, its virtue in a different sphere to the wisdom of reason. The wisdom of beauty is beyond pleasure. Pleasure is eager to be satisfied and is then thirsty again. Beauty, on the other hand, is oriented towards saturation and dreams of remaining in that moment. Love Virtue, goodness, and freedom are not sought in pleasure. In contrast to the expectation of the temporary satisfaction of pleasure, beauty is associated with a desire for endless attachment. This is the last part. Art doesn't reveal the beautiful in humans. It shows humans how to be beautiful and do beautiful. Beauty is indexical. It refers to a truth beyond itself. It calls out aude et sensum, dare to sense, and aude percipere, dare to perceive. Instead of asking what is the truth, it motivates making and rendering a truth. Friedrich Schiller states, quote, "It can be said that every individual carries within himself, by disposition and vocation, a purely ideal man, the great task of his existence being to reconcile all his shifts and changes with its immutable unity. Reason furthers unity, but nature furthers diversity. Both lay claim to man." End quote. This is why the beauty in art is not only that the content acquires a new form, but also that the form becomes a new content. The content of the Mona Lisa is the beauty of painting itself. Since Schiller states the paradox between the unity furthered by reason and the diversity furthered by nature, humans desire to bring truth beyond reality into the present, that is, to bring future time into existence and become part of universals in this life. That's all for today.